Rebecca. I joined Snowball in the summer last year. I'm in the investment team as investment associate. And today I'm going to kick off the portfolio showcase with Circularity Capital. And today we're joined by partner Jamie Butterworth online. So hi, Jamie.
Hi, Matt.
So we'll have about 10 minutes of Q&A with Jamie and I, and then have a few minutes at the end as well for the audience to ask any questions. So have a think as we're going through. So hi, Jamie. Maybe to start with, you could introduce yourself and give us a 30-second description of your impact solution.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Jamie Butterworth. I'm a partner at Circularity Capital. We are a specialist manager investing in growth stage businesses operating in the circular economy. We believe that the circular economy is a really powerful framework for delivering premium financial returns alongside measurable positive environmental impact.
Great, thank you. And maybe to give us more flavour of what you do, could you tell us what types of business models Circularity Capital backs to disrupt the status quo?
Sure, yeah. So we believe, as a bit of context, that today's economy is very linear. We typically create value by digging something out of the ground, turning that into a material or a product, using that for an increasingly short period of time before throwing that away. And in that process, we create a huge amount of waste. So just to put that in perspective, a third of all the food we produce ends up getting wasted. Or if you look at IT assets like the computer I'm talking to you on, or the mobile phone you probably have in your pocket, we throw away one cruise ship per day by weight of those types of assets globally, most of those assets working perfectly well. So this linear process is very wasteful. And what we're now beginning to see is a growing number of businesses adopting circular business models to keep those assets, materials, components in circulation longer, and ultimately in doing so to decouple their growth from resource constraints. And our strategy, we're a real specialist in those types of business model. That's all we do. So we have set ourselves up to be good at identifying those companies and then helping those businesses to grow. And we look at three areas of the circular economy that we think are particularly attractive. Circular use models, so moving away from selling product to providing outcomes or access or flexible rental to products. Secondly, circular products and materials, so businesses using either a waste-based input or a bio-based input to displace virgin fossil-based materials where there's a commercial advantage in doing so. And thirdly, enabling solutions. So those are the types of businesses which are being used typically by large corporate companies to accelerate and scale up their own circular business practices.
Great, thank you. And part of Snowball's strategy is to back specialist thematic managers, as we think this can give them an edge. And so what advantages do you think you have as a specialist in the circular economy?
Yeah, so we think it is really important to be a specialist in this space. We don't think that all circular businesses are representative and attractive investment opportunity. We think there are a subset of companies that are particularly attractive where that business model is really scalable. And so we've set up ourselves to be able to be better at sourcing those types of companies. So being able to use thesis-driven sourcing to look at areas of the economy, for example, which are particularly linear today, and then identify that subset of opportunities within those, and effectively to be able to fish in the right pool for those types of companies. The second component is then to get better at selecting best in class from that group of companies. So that's really about looking at lots and lots of the same types of business with the same type of business model, and then starting to build up a very clear picture of the attractive and unattractive attributes of these types of companies so that you can quickly identify best in class and really drill into that in due diligence. The third area is then having more relevant operational growth support. So again, if you're investing in the same types of business at the same type of stage with the same type of business model, you can start to develop operational growth support capabilities both in-house and in your network that are more relevant to support the growth of those businesses. And linking all that together, we believe that the entrepreneurs of circular businesses really want to see this. So they want to find an investor who really understands their business model, who has that operational growth support capability. And so we think it then allows you to select and win the best opportunities within the circular economy. So we really do think being a specialist is beneficial in this area.
Great, thanks. And maybe we could bring that to life a bit, talking about identifying some of the best-in-class opportunities. One of your best returning investments so far is Grover. Can you tell us a bit about the complexities around assessing impact and just more generally about Grover?
Yeah, sure. So maybe to give people a bit of context, so Grover fits in the circular use bucket that I mentioned earlier. So they are a business which provides a flexible rental model for consumer electronics, so everything from laptops to mobile phones to digital cameras to gaming equipment, for example. They have hundreds of different technology products on their platform, and they provide that on a flexible rental basis. So you use that product for as long as you need it for. Once you finish with the product, it goes back to Grover, it gets refurbished into as new condition. So the battery is checked, screen is checked. It then goes out to a new customer. When we first invested in Grover, we had a very clear theory of change that Grover was helping to accelerate the transition towards the circular economy in the technology product industry. And we worked with the team to build a methodology for how to measure that. And we look at the number of units of virgin manufacture that are displaced by Grover. So effectively, we're able to satisfy the same number of customers using less products. And that really links to the bit I mentioned around being a specialist and helping these companies to grow. So one element that these businesses really benefit from is getting really good at how you validate and articulate your environmental impact in a way that makes sense to your customers and ultimately to future investors. And with Grover, we worked with them over 18 months to develop this model to then allow them to be able to report on the displaced virgin manufacturing effect and have that as part of their management reporting information and then flowing into their sales and marketing documentation and ultimately into their investor communications. Now, I think the point that you might be alluding to specifically was around the kind of granularity of that. So we do that on an asset level basis. So individual products all have different characteristics. So for example, a constant use product like a mobile phone is very different from an impact perspective to something like a digital camera, which is being used on an intermittent basis. So the impact model would take into account the different characteristics of the product to be able to build out what the avoided emissions are or the avoided virgin manufacture impact is.
Great, thank you. And once a company in the portfolio reaches a certain scale, what do you see that it can do that it couldn't do right at the outset when you first met them?
Yeah, so I think obviously by the time a company gets to a scale in the market where it's starting to sort of fundamentally change the way that people are interacting with products, it is starting to accelerate that transition towards a more circular economy. So a company like Grover now, for example, they have grown to have 750,000 subscribers in the markets they serve, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland, the Netherlands. And that's now having quite a big impact in terms of how they source that product and in terms of disrupting traditional product sales in that market. I would also point towards other investments in our portfolio. For example, we're an investor in a business called Bike Club that some people in your audience might have come across being based in the UK. And they provide a flexible rental model for children's bicycles. So as your child grows out of their bicycle every 12 to 18 months, they provide a model whereby you use the bike for as long as you need it for. Once you've finished with it, you press a button on an app, a new bike arrives, the old one gets taken away, and the old bike gets remanufactured and goes out to another family. And we know from our analysis that normal bicycles, kind of your average bicycle, will be a steel-framed bicycle which gets used by about 2.5 families, whereas a Bike Club bike will get used by more than 8 families. And within this model, there's an opportunity when you get to scale to then start to influence the actual design of the asset itself. So, for example, Bike Club have purchased another bike brand called Form to allow them to vertically integrate. and that allows you to start to tweak the design of the product, because most of these products were never designed to fit a circular business model and be used that number of times. So you can start to actually optimize the design of that product to gain even more margin efficiency and even more sustainability benefits.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear about how Bike Club and how scale can then change business models and change how things evolve with scale. So one thing I've been interested about is why customers are buying into circular economy businesses like Bike Club, and how important it is from a sustainability angle. Is it from a sustainability perspective that people are buying into this, or is the circular economy business model generally providing other advantages that other models don't?
Yeah, good question. So part of our strategy is we're always seeking for there to be a commercial advantage from the business as well as the impact it's generating. So the way we describe that is the types of businesses we're investing in, the fact that they have a circular business model is what needs to drive their long-term sustainable competitive advantage. And that is the case if you look, for example, you mentioned Bike Club, where, as I mentioned, in kind of business as usual, you get quite a heavy steel frame bike. It costs you quite a lot of money because you're only using it over 1.5 children, let's say, or 2 children. And also, once you finish with it, you need to dispose of it, which is a hassle. So Bike Club solves those 3 issues. It provides it on an affordable basis. You end up with a higher quality bicycle, so an aluminium frame. It's easier for the child to learn to ride on. It's more enjoyable. And ultimately also you don't have the hassle factor, and given many people live in urbanised areas where you have limited access to storage, you don't need to be concerned with what you do with the bike once you've finished with it. So what we've seen in the market, for example, is traditional bike retailers like Halfords, for example, would be the biggest in the UK, growing at maybe between 2 and 4% per year, whereas companies like Bike Club are growing consistently at around 50% per year. So you really see these circular business models driving that long-term sustainable competitive advantage because they're giving the customer a better product. You're getting that increase in resource utilisation, and that is collinear with the way that you're generating the environmental, positive environmental impact.
Great, thank you. So I think now we could move on to a couple of questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions for Jamie about anything that he said or otherwise. Yes, someone at the back.
Hi, Jamie. Thank you for that. Really, really interesting. Curious with the types of models and where we're seeing circularity at the moment is effectively intermediaries popping up. So the types of businesses you've just spoken to, they're taking the product from manufacturers who are still really operating on a linear model. So Raleigh, for example, are still making standard bicycles in a standard model that come to the intermediary, and it's the intermediary who then comes in and creates that circularity, which is brilliant. Just intrigued as your crystal ball looking, 10 years ahead sort of thing, if these models become more common, do you foresee that becoming the mainstream with these intermediaries, or do you think we can actually affect back up to the actual manufacturers and we will start to see, just in the example of bikes at Raleigh or somebody like that, going, hang on a second, it makes far more sense for us to be doing this? Just intrigued what you think.
Yes, good question. So firstly, we have observed that it's extremely difficult for traditional manufacturing businesses to move into a circular business model. It's very hard for them to do that. They're not really set up to do that easily. And that's one of the big questions we had around Grover before we invested, is the extent to which their model would be sustainable in a market where OEMs might move towards a more circular business model. And what we found in reality is it's really difficult for the large OEM consumer technology brands to move into that model, and they are rather relying on large companies like Grover to provide that route to market as an additional option for them. That said, there are examples of large corporates really successfully making the transition. One example I would give you is Philips, who decided very consciously about 5 years ago that the future of their healthcare division for their high-end machinery was to provide that in a circular model. So rather than providing hospitals with MRI machines, they would move towards providing imaging. and in doing so, they would start to optimize the design of the blood pressure monitoring devices or CAT scanners or MRI machines to be designed for circularity. They would invest in the remanufacturing infrastructure. They would change the incentive schemes of their sales team and senior management to have as much of their revenue coming in through these circular business models, and that has really worked for them and has really driven a kind of USP for that company in particular. So I think we are seeing that in different areas. I think the other bit I should say is I've just spoken to you about one of those growth themes, so circular use models. We also are obviously seeing a huge amount of change and innovation around the two other areas. So maybe just to touch on one example in each of those other areas. If you look at circular products and materials, we are an investor in a business called Shark Solutions, based in headquartered in Denmark, but with big manufacturing facilities in Europe and both coasts of the US. And they take broken car windscreens and they separate out the glass from the polyvinyl butyrol, which is the interlaminate layer that stops the glass from shattering in an accident. That polymer retails at about €10,000 a tonne, is made by only 2 companies in the world in a virgin form. And what Shark are able to do is displace that virgin content using recycled content for use in a whole range of different industrial applications. And those types of businesses in the right context we are seeing growing really strongly at the moment to satisfy corporate demand. But we're looking for that subset where they gain a sustainable advantage from using waste as a feedstock in that regard. And then in the third area around enabling solutions, companies like Philips and others who are looking to make this transition, they need the types of tools and the digital backbone in order to scale up their circular practices. So as an example, our most recent investment was in a business called TrustTrace. We did a big study on looking at supply chain transparency, which we believe is an area of the economy which is really growing, partly driven by consumer pressure, regulatory pressure, but also commercial advantage. And businesses really need to digitize their supply chain in order to understand what's happening. So we looked at a range of companies in that space, and we identified one business that we really think is a kind of a leader in an industry which is very fragmented and very wasteful, the fashion, sort of textiles and apparel industry, and that's a business called TrustTrace. So they provide that supply chain transparency solution for customers like Nike and Adidas and Primark. And so we're seeing a lot of opportunities in those enabling solutions types businesses as well.
Great, thank you. I think that's probably all we've got time for. But thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you for joining us. Really interesting discussion, and thank you for your question. So yeah, if we all